Hello and welcome to The Navel Gaze, a podcast about autosexuality. I'm Tali Botts. This is Aaron Terrell. And today we are going to be reacting to the now viral clip from the newest season of White Lotus. This clip has received a lot of attention for being sort of ridiculous and shocking. And for those sort of in the know, it's been written about as this classic case study of autogynephilia in film. Like, finally, the true message of trans has been brought to the main screen. And so we want to watch that with you guys and maybe scrutinize that a little bit.
Yeah, it's really depressing. I find we've been talking about it, how depressing it is, and people are like, "Oh, they're finally talking about autogynephilia. This is a classic case. This is a perfect example of like just your classic autogynephilia." And we're here like, no,
Yeah.
and over again, it's these takes that are like, oh, it's true autogynephilia, and yeah, it's basically. I mean, I think a lot of it's very accurate and was well presented. But there's just a lot of misconceptions that unfortunately play into, a lot of the kind of like incorrect, kind of disparaging versions of autogynephilia that certainly aren't the primary presentation, we would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. And yeah, it's important that we're sort of grounding in reality what autogynephilia is, and for people like the two of us who care about the potential clinical implications of understanding autogynephilia, we're sort of acutely aware of how autogynephiles might interpret basically that word or that message. If someone is saying, well, this here is the quintessential form of autogynephilia, how that's going to impact them sort of seeing themselves in it and recognizing their experience as such. But before I get too far ahead of myself,
Okay,
you want to watch the whole thing through, I guess?
Yeah, I think we should just play the whole thing through in its entirety, and then we can kind of comment on it at the end. Excuse me, we'll play a little bit more of it than I think that's been viral, because I think there's a part in the beginning of it that's really important that's been left out. So we'll just roll through the whole thing. I mean, it's a great piece of cinema, that's for sure. But yeah, all right, let's dig into it here.
Well, I moved here because I had to leave the States, but I picked Thailand because I always had a thing for Asian girls, And when I got here, I was like a kid in a candy store. If you got money, no attachments, nothing to do, I started partying.
Yeah.
It got wild.
Mm-hmm.
I was picking up girls every night. Always different ones, petite ones, chubby ones, older ones, sometimes multiple ladies a night. I was out of control. I became insatiable.
Yeah.
And, after about 1,000 nights like that, you start to lose it. I started wondering, where am I going with this? Why do I feel this need to fuck all these women? What is desire? The form of this cute Asian girl, why does it have such a grip on me? Because she's the opposite of me. Is she going to complete me in some way? I realized I could fuck a million women, I'd still never be satisfied. Maybe what I really want is to be one of these Asian girls.
Really? Not really.
No, really.
Really?
So one night I took home some girl, turned out to be a lady boy, which I'd done before, but this time, instead of fucking the lady boy fucked me. It was kind of magical. And I got in my head what I really wanted was to be one of these Asian girls getting fucked by me and to feel that.
Uh-huh.
So I put out an ad looking for a white guy my age come over and fuck me. Found a guy looked a lot like me. Then I put on some lingerie and perfume, made myself look like one of these girls. And I thought I looked pretty hot. And then this guy came over and railed the shit out of me. And then I got addicted to that. Some nights 3, 4 guys would come over and rail the shit out of me. Some I even had to pay. And at the same time, I'd hire an Asian girl to just sit there and watch the whole thing. I'd look in her eyes while some guy was fucking me, and I'd think, I am her, and I'm fucking me.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, we all have our Achilles heel, man, you know. Where does it come from? Why are some of us attracted to the opposite form?
Yeah.
And some of us the same. Sex is a poetic act. It's a metaphor. Metaphor for what? Are we our forms? Am I a middle-aged white guy on the inside too? Or inside? Could I be an Asian girl?
Right. I don't know.
Guess I was trying to fuck my way to the answer. And then I realized I gotta stop the drugs, the girls, trying to be a girl. I got into Buddhism, which is all about, spirit versus form, detaching from self, getting off the never-ending carousel of lust and suffering. Being sober isn't so hard. Being celibate, though, I still miss that buzzy, man.
Yeah.
I don't know if she can do a deal from Super.
Okay. That's I think more than's usually included in the viral clips. I guess we can quit the sharing now. There we go. Initial thoughts? I think you might be muted.
That's yeah, that's funny. I was just saying to you, first thoughts. Yeah, I mean, so my first thoughts were, like many people, including Ray Blanchard himself, it's exciting to see the core of this idea reflected in popular culture. This core sort of inversion of heterosexuality, right? That he's able to put into words. Like, I felt like I wanted to be an Asian woman, like I wanted to be the women that I was sleeping with. So I think it was cool to see that, and it's framed really strongly in the context of sex addiction, basically.
Yep. I think that's
Yeah.
that's my what I think is the biggest problem with this is a lot of people seem to have this idea that autogynephilia is the result of overexposure to sex, overexposure, overindulgence. It's like, I've had sex with so many people, it's become inverted or whatever. Like, that's not actually how it happens. That's not like,
right. It's
yeah.
not like a what's left. I've done all these other kinks, and now, like, what's the next step or something.
Right. I think this presentation of it, or like showing it in this light, it really, I think, inhibits our project, or like what we think is important, is for people to see this in, virgin teenagers, right? Who've never had a girlfriend, never kissed anybody,
Right.
but it's still autogynephilia. That's the source of their gender problems. But yeah, then, these people see this and they're like, oh yeah, no, it's just overindulgence. This is something that happens to middle-aged men who've had way too much sex, way too self-indulgent, and it becomes this inversion. And yeah, that's my biggest gripe, I think, with the with the way that was presented. And again, I think that's a really important part that a lot of the other takes of the scene left out, is that part about how, it's basically like, I slept with hundreds of women and then some lady boys, and then realized, oh, I want to be the Asian lady boy. It's like, I think that's crucial and detrimental to the kind of educating or mainstreaming the concept of autogynephilia.
Yeah, well, another good thing that it did, or interesting thing that it did, is bring GAMP into it, right? Which is sort of tied into, as we've talked about before, GAMP and autogynephilia, attraction to feminized males and desire to be a trans woman, are like tightly related, right? The research is still out as to whether they are one in the same, right? And GAMP or AGP is a byproduct of GAMP, or vice versa. And so it was interesting that they brought that point up. And again, there's truth to that description. And then they lose us a little bit the details. I guess, I'm wondering how frequent it would be. Well, okay. I just think I maybe just answered my own question. I was going to say, I'm wondering like how frequent it would be that an autogynephile with some level of dysphoria or something would want to be penetrated by a ladyboy partner. But I guess I maybe take that back, right? I mean, as we've talked about before, like T for T is a very real thing. And so when we put it in the context of like this very, straight looking guy and a lady boy, that's different from all the, kind of like tender queer autistics who are, getting together off screen in the real world. But it's framed as an escalation of sexual behavior, and especially in the context of like he had sort of moved to, again, I haven't watched the show, but he had sort of moved to Thailand, and this was like basically all his life was at this point, was just like having sex with a bunch of women. It does that's not great, right? That does really make it seem like harmful, for lack of better terms, right? Like sort of the end product of a really ugly
sex addiction
kind of path. Yeah.
Right.
Detrimental. Yeah.
Yep. And another thing that I've been kind of listening to autogynephiles, studying the phenomenon for a long time, and I have never heard anyone describe that experience of both wanting to be himself and wanting to be the object of desire. It's like this circular inception type sexual experience that I've never heard explained. Haven't had any other autogynephile. I'm sure there are those men out there who have this experience, but I think it's vanishingly rare. It's mostly all about, they can be a male in the sexual act sometimes, but they prefer to be, in the female role, pretending to be female. They're not simultaneously doing the female fantasy and the self as male, having sex with the self, like, and that's another why this
seeking kind of, for male partners that look like him.
Yes.
As a man. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very, very unusual. And just like how a lot of the people who kind of spread kind of disparaging misunderstandings of autogynephilia as being, the result of a overindulged sex addiction. This also plays into their notion of AGP being sexual narcissism. Like that's exactly
Yeah.
what, he's the trope of both of those. Like this character is the
Yeah.
trope of both of those. And there's no dysphoria, right? He has no dysphoria about being, a white man. Like it's just that he thinks it's super hot to be an Asian girl. And
Right.
again, it's just the overexposure to this target attraction and wanting to be it, but also wanting to be like, it's just.
Yeah. No, I think that's important too. That's what I was going to say a second ago. It's like, it's really certainly not helping us beat the narcissism allegations, right?
Yeah.
With this idea that, he wants to imagine himself as the Asian woman while looking at the Asian woman to channel her experience while also selecting a man that looks as close to him as possible so that he can feel like he's getting to fuck himself as his Asian woman self. Yeah, and I think the problem that I'm having is that I'm sure this is an accurate representation of someone out there. There are, and it's not just one person, likely. I think the main issue that I take is how many people are sharing this as the quintessential autogynephilic experience. When I think, like you said, I think that's really rare. I know I've heard of plenty of stories of, autogynephiles or autoheterosexuals in general who, when having sex, yes, they like to imagine that they are their partner, right? They're sort of self-inserting as their partner. And in that way, they are the ones, they are fucking themselves, right? And so I can see how that is there and could be there for other autogynephiles too, but it doesn't come across in that way of, right, like I'm actually seeking out men who I think look like the male version of me in such an explicit way.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a good point about the no dysphoria too. And yeah, this is where it gets just really frustrating with so many of the people who are just super anti-trans who want it to be a really ugly, dangerous thing. Right. Whereas it's one thing to share this clip and say, this is an example of autogynephilia, which, hey, it is. A pretty crazy example, a pretty extreme example, a non-dysphoric example. I mean, again, I'm not watching the show, but this doesn't seem like a guy who's on the cusp of transition here or anything like that. But a lot of people who are well respected in the gender critical space have been sharing this and writing think pieces about how the secret's out, right? Like this is and it goes back to also, sorry to jump all over the place, but it just goes back to this point that you and I have touched on a lot. This idea that autogynephiles are part of a conspiracy to hide autogynephilia. And this is partially true, as we know from Galileo's middle finger and the reaction to Mike Bailey's book. But even that, it has been successfully suppressed so much in the last 2 decades that most trans people don't know what it is. They are not hiding some real, true, authentic desire or motivation. It just doesn't feel like that to them. And so again, the fact that this guy is not seemingly non-dysphoric at all, I'm sure there are a lot of trans women who would get secondhand dysphoria watching that clip, not just feel super seen or embarrassed and seen or outed in some way. Yeah, and I think that just does a disservice to everybody because it's already hard enough to get trans people to be open to the existence of the phenomenon of autogynephilia. And then we have people at the head of the movement saying, this is what autogynephilia looks like. This right here. Yeah.
Yep. And so again, if this is what autogynephilia is, if this is what's motivating most MTF transition, okay, then what explains the highly dysphoric 17-year-old boy who won't leave his bedroom? It's like we're just back at that level of not understanding what this is. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Most dysphoric or trans identified males trans women, whatever, aren't going to see that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I haven't been plugged into the kind of trans queer discourse around this. Have you seen any of that? I'm as far as I'm aware, there's kind of crickets. Like nobody's going, "Oh my God, this is transphobia," which is what I kind of expected. This episode's almost 2 weeks old now. I
Right.
assumed there would be this big, this is transphobia outcry against White Lotus, but I don't think that's happened. And I think it is
Well,
because
they
most
couldn't do that because they would have to acknowledge that this is a
right, okay,
trans
yeah,
adjacent phenomenon, right? Because he's not
right,
playing a
right,
trans character; he's playing an autogynephilic character, and they would
right.
have to then acknowledge that trans identity has anything to do with sexuality, that it could even possibly be related to this. The only responses I
Okay.
saw were I saw responses to the tweets of people saying like, "Oh yeah, like look at this amazing example of autogynephilia."
Mhm.
I saw like a trans woman who I've referenced on the show before without, I don't ever really name her, but she's like a barometer of where I temperature check how autogynephilia discourse is going, because
Okay.
she's sort of like one of the, she probably fancies herself a base transsexual, and she doesn't love that. Sorry.
You're good.
She doesn't love the term autogynephilia, but she sees and recognizes the typology. And so anyway, someone had tweeted out the video with an accompanying little tweet about how this is this awesome example. And she was just like, no. Like it was just so obvious that she didn't recognize herself in any of that and did not see that as resembling her experience. And yeah, but even her, I didn't see her saying that it was transphobic, because then again, I think then you need to be willing to say that these are actually talking about the same phenomena.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think it would probably in trans spaces be more presented as the creepy chaser. Like this is the psychology of the creepy chaser who, gets the trans girlfriend and then, wants her to top
Yes.
him kind of thing is
Like
probably
the
how it's
Envy
understood.
Desire. Yeah, it's like the main guy in Envy Desire.
I still haven't
Who
seen that. I should do that.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
you should do that. You should do that. But yeah, one of the trans women's boyfriends, like she comes home and like catches him cross-dressing or whatever, and he's
Right.
like watching a lot of trans porn and stuff, and then yeah, like he decides that he wants to transition, and it blows up their relationship. And yeah, and he's talked about as this freak AGP chaser, basically.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they're probably the ones again, like the Sam Rockwell's character in this season, where it's just like every day he just comes across as just like a normal middle-aged man, and so it's easy to kind of
Right.
put a wedge between that presentation and the full-time trans woman, and yeah, they're not gonna want to pretend like it's the same psychological experience. And again, like I don't know how common this experience is. I've never heard it spoken about before. I've never heard somebody, explain that experience of not just wanting to be, a woman sexually, but also simultaneously wanting to be their male self at the same time. And yeah, this kind of circular sexual act like that. I have never heard that explained. And I think that in of itself is probably going to make a lot of trans women similarly not identify with it and not feel challenged or not feel insulted by it, essentially, just because I think that's a pretty niche experience, I suspect.
Yeah, no, and I completely agree with you. And I think if you're ever going to hear a story like that, it is gonna come from an autogynephile, right? And so like I'm
Well,
trying
yeah.
to like, and when I think about even like Kevin Sue and people who commented on this, who recognize this as obviously an example of gynanthropomorphophilia and autogynephilia, whether or not it's particularly flattering or representative.
Yeah.
I do think it's representative of some subset of autogynephiles. However, I don't think it's the majority. And it's not the majority who are, like, frankly, autogynephiles with this experience, even this really extreme experience, are not transitioning, right? Like
True.
in the
Yeah.
show. And so it's like
Yeah.
that almost doesn't matter. It's like if we're only able to talk and penetrate about the most extreme cases who are the non-dysphoric males who are not going to transition, then we're not actually doing anything to chip away at the problem here, which
That's
is
true.
gender ideology and believing that you can literally change sex, or believing that you should be legally entitled to recognition as the opposite sex, and all of the things that come from the desire to transition. I guess one good thing that the show did, or that the scene does, it doesn't only talk about it in sexual terms, although obviously it's a lot of sex that brings him to this place, but he does at least in a funny way, he does the TRA thing where he like talks about being born in the wrong body, but he does acknowledge this emotional component. And maybe that's an interesting way to look at it, a little bit of a glass half full, is like, even in this interpretation or this example of autogynephilia that is so sexually motivated, that where they're not expressing any type of clear dysphoria, and the person doesn't seem transition motivated or any of this, and again, they're really speaking about it in terms of sex addiction, even that person expresses this emotional, almost personality side of it, right? Like I'm wondering, like, could this be who I really am on the inside? Like maybe I'm this white guy on the outside, and almost like he's resigned to that. Like, okay, yeah, this is like who I am, but maybe I am this like Asian woman on the inside. And so even in this like totally sexed up extreme version of AGP, they accurately show this sort of intangible thing that GCs like to jump at and make fun of because it sounds so silly on the surface, but sort of is this core part of autogynephilia that is the part that I think most people have a hard time wrapping their head around, especially people who just hear about it and are kind of turned off by the idea. It's like it's almost like, how could one lead to a sincere declaration of the other? Like, how could all of the, how could this paraphilia and this kink and this sexual thing actually make you feel, even consider that you might really be a woman? Like, it's sort of like, where does the jump go from sexual drive, even persistent sexual drive, to wanting to live this way full time? And they don't
Right.
explain it, but they at least sort of present it as even part of this guy's experience. I don't know if I'm reaching too much to give it a positive spin here, but
Yeah, it does definitely verge into, that kind of like the gender ideology stuff. And he's basically saying that maybe I was pursuing all these women. I was so insatiably, I was, having all this chronic, basically maybe the sex addiction was just me trying to access my real inner self. Right. And so I think that's maybe how they jump that divide, is like, it's like, and again, probably a lot of AGP trans women, have that explanation for themselves as well. It's like, oh, this was just my attempt to bring my inside self, to manifest it. And I was seeking all these different women to do that. But yeah, I just don't know how common that kind of, I guess in the more GAMP presentation probably is, when you don't have like the dysphoria that's inhibiting you sexually.
right.
But yeah, it is quite bold of them, to, I didn't think about that. If, when we first started talking about this, is they can kind of, as like, protect themselves from the transphobia backlash by, look, this is just a regular dude living. He's not transitioning, not talking about transitioning, but he does. Well, maybe I'm really a woman on the inside. And, which is, quite, I think, probably quite, provocative to say the least, to the believers.
And again, it's like the trans people or the activists can't get so mad at that because the character is not making fun of it.
Right. Yeah.
It's a sincere profession, or confession from from the character. And then, the other thing that was kind of fun about it, enjoyable about the scene, is his buddy's facial reactions. And there were a lot of good, memes and stuff of like me the first time I learned about autogynephilia, right? And it's like his friend, like,
Yeah.
And that captures something real, which is like when you're hearing about this for the first time, it's really jarring and confusing, even if intuitive, even if you can follow.
Yeah.
It's almost
And,
this radical thing that kind of,
and so many, this is kind of, I think, kind of a classic coming out sort of situation, because so many autogynephiles will say, like their friends and family, their buddies that they've had for years are like, what? You're just a normal dude. You're just like, a ladies' man or whatever. Like this doesn't make any sense. And I think that was kind of the dynamic between those two as well, just like broy bros. And here this one
right.
is saying, oh, maybe I'm an Asian girl on the inside. Oh, and that's another thing that's so upsetting to me about this scene. Or not
That
upsetting,
it
but
had
it's
to
just
be
like,
Asian.
yes, they had to include this like
They had to
trans
do the
race
race
element.
Yeah.
It's like every
Yeah.
single thing about the whole autogynephilia experience is like they've taken facets of just all the pieces that really naturally offend people.
Yeah.
You're
right.
Ouch.
They went full Ollie London. Which I'm just realizing now, like, has the Ollie London autogynephilia road ever been taken? But we'll just put that on
that'll be a next episode.
on hold for a second. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, I know. And again, it's like part of me, and I'm almost like thinking with a Phil cap on now. In the same way that I see like these researchers who were like happy to see autogynephilia presented, even if not super sympathetically or whatever. Like I could see someone like Phil being like, but this is a real experience.
Yeah.
There are guys who want to be women and women of a different race. And so to that extent, I'm like, yeah, like it is getting at something real here. But it doesn't help that it's all the kind of stereotypes, all the things that make people viscerally uncomfortable, which is a masculine man professing femininity, right? Professing that he wants to be a woman, and a white person professing some type of trans racial identity. I mean, those are like all the things that make people really uncomfortable.
Right. And that it was the end result of a sex addiction as well. Like, I fucked all of these women, and then I realized that I actually wanted to be the woman, and to be the woman means to have the shit railed out of you. Like that's like, it's just very, it presents the entire experience in like the most, negative, just a way that it's so completely, unsympathetic, let's say. Like it's a very unsympathetic experience and character. And I think, what I really want to do, and I know, Phil's not as, yes, there are going to be real life people who have this experience, but I want people to see autogynephilia in what it's more often presented as, and the demographic that's more susceptible and vulnerable to transition, which is going to be your reclusive, nerdy, aspy men and boys who are like not at all identifiable in this character. And I guess that's my biggest problem with it is it doesn't, I wanted to showcase autogynephilia for what it normally looks like.
This correct. This scene really only speaks to kind of gender criticals, basically people who know about autogynephilia, and dislike it, and maybe the sort of sexology nerds who, again, they're seeing gynandromorpha, they're seeing specific attraction to trans women represented. I don't mean represented in the gay way, right? But just like shown, expressed.
Pun there. I didn't catch at first. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, that's like the only like you're saying, this scene is just not going to speak to trans women, really, or
Mhm.
particularly dysphoric males. I think something too, like, as I try to wrestle with the fact, this sort of sex addiction paradigm, and I'm with you, like, I don't think that's the best way to describe it for most people, especially when we take into consideration the sort of entirely asexual or anal-erotic, cohort here. But I think for a lot of the males, for obvious libidinal reasons, the sex is playing a large role in it, even for the ones who are also developing or experiencing dysphoria. And I think about, I sent you, Aaron, Chloe Cole released an interview the other day with a young male detransitioner, and I don't know if I finished all of it. I watched most of the like hour and a half of the conversation. And I mean, in my humble estimation, this kid is obviously autogynephilic. And to his credit, like, I think he spoke pretty honestly about his whole experience. He didn't use that word. And I'm, I doubt he would like that word very much. But he, talks about the exposure to sort of like trans pornography really being what kind of set him down this road, like what kind of started this. But this young boy is a very sympathetic character. First of all, he was young, right? He's not some like insatiable sex addicted adult who's going and spending all of his money to, purchase prostitutes on the other side of the world, right? He's like this young confused kid, but he says very explicitly that it was a sexual thing that first brought him down this sort of rabbit hole. And he has all of these other quintessential, more sympathetic experiences, right? Which is like being masculine, but like not being sporty, not feeling like he could relate to the men in his life in the same way that other guys were, feeling alienated from maleness, not wanting to be someone who hurts women. Like all of these other things were there too. And yes, it's more sympathetic, and I do think it's more accurate. Like I think it's the rare exception for the people for whom it's mostly just sexual, and yeah, maybe they feel, oh, I'm really a woman on the inside, but it's not weighing them down. They're never seriously considering transition or something like that. I think these are two different ends of the spectrum, and I wish that there was a more sympathetic representation of like this young guy's story and less of a focus on the totally non-transitioning, actually sex addicted, middle-aged autogynephile.
And it's also generational too. Like, like say this character were a real person, and he were born 20 years later or whatever. It's very likely that maybe he would have come to these autogynephilic feelings long before, he was, sleeping with, a different prostitute every night.
Right.
I think, there's different, just different, just based on the culture that you grow up in, even within the States, it's the culture has changed dramatically. And a lot of these kids, they grow up online and they're exposed to all this kinds of porn where they can, identify, kind of like their sexual appetite in a way that, a man 20, 30 years older than them would, take a lot of, sexual experiences to come to, like, the late, Lisa Shoop, Jamie Shoop, however we want to refer to them at the time. It's difficult to talk about Shoop just because, so many psychological problems in general. But we had them on the Transparency podcast. I think it was the 4th episode, very early on. And I'll just go with he was very open about the fact that it was pornography, that like, and I had, there was like the gender critical trope that, oh, it's porn that creates this. And I had been, kind of in the more Blanchard, scope already by that point. And I understood it to be something that usually manifests much, at least back in the day, much sooner than people gained access to porn. And it was something else usually that triggered it, like their mom's pantyhose or, their sister's dress or whatever. Like they were exposed to something that was like, oh, I've got to have that. I've got to wear that. And he said, no, absolutely. There was nothing when he was a kid, a teenager, nothing. He was well into his career at the military. He developed a porn addiction, and it just got to the point where he was no longer like identifying with the male in the heterosexual porn. He was like self-inserting as the female, and it was like something that developed over time. So yes, I think that's absolutely a thing that happens. I still think the autogynephilic predisposition was always there. It's just it's triggered, it's unlocked by some sexual experience.
So the sort of porn addiction or sex addiction is going to be relatable for some people. Potentially, I think it's more likely to be relatable to detransitioners, just because people do reframe these experiences based on the context, right? And I'm trying not to put too much of a judgment on that, like, because I think someone could, both frames could be right and wrong, basically. The frame of someone who's living as trans who did sort of get into this by falling down some type of sissy porn rabbit hole or whatever, who doesn't see it as an addiction, and maybe it's not, and someone who then chooses to detransition and says like, wow, this was really all motivated by basically my sex drive, and it was functioning like an addiction because I was doing these things in spite of knowing that it would make my life more difficult, blah blah blah. So I think both of those framings like can be accurate, and it's not so important like which one is more true, and it's going to really depend on the person. But I think my biggest takeaway issue with this scene is this just the same issue that comes back to the whole reason that we're doing this, is like this experience will not be seen as relatable for most trans women. For the few people who might find it relatable, they might resent the sort of representation of it in that way. And it's like, even if it's accurate, I'm not saying that we should lie about what autogynephilia is, but if we are concerned, like, I'm not just satisfied with addressing autogynephilia, with explaining what it is, right? Like, I'm concerned with us being able to putting this information in the hands of autogynephiles, in the hands of dysphoric people, in the hands of clinicians who are dealing with dysphoric people. And it just simply does matter that they are able to see themselves in that representation, and that there is some type of sympathetic experience for them to connect to.
Yeah. And I think it's also really important for the family members of dysphoric males, especially young males, right? It's like they're not going to see their son, their boyfriend, their brother, whatever, in this character. And yeah, it's just yeah.
Well, and what you say, especially with like the, where we see the numbers proliferating is in the young cohort, right? As in young people, young men who are having this experience and, deciding to transition. And yeah, if we continue to only present it as a middle-aged sex addiction, we're just going to continue down the road that we're at now, which is, nope, that is obviously doesn't describe me.
It's something else for the young ones.
Right, exactly. For both the transitioners and the detransitioners.
Yep.
For the transitioners, no, that's obviously not me. Ugh, I'm not some disgusting porn addicted. I never even had sex, right? Like all the things. And then even for the detransitioners, right? It's this unrelatable, skeevy thing that's not sympathy inducing. That's the thing too, is like, Shoop's a tragic figure in all of this, obviously. And Shoop was not that sympathetic ever. During times of transition, obviously not sympathetic, because, then Jamie would try to slander people that he had spoken to, you know, in times of detransition, and became always really extreme and really militant. But Jamie was never that sympathetic during detransition either, and that's probably in part due to the fact that he was just really transparent about the ugly side of it. I don't know. It's also maybe a personality thing too. But.
Yeah, I think he was often doing the thing that another one of our friends in this seems to be doing as well, where it's like painting autogynephiles in the worst possible light as a means of discouraging himself from indulging it, right?
Yes.
And so I think that kind of adds to why he was so unsympathetic, is because in his periods of detransition, he was sharing all the most grotesque manifestations and like the worst things that autogynephilia drove him to, as a means of, I think, being like just constantly talking himself out of going down that road again, by airing the most dirty laundry. And yeah, that's, I mean, I found him sympathetic just because of the, you know, before I kind of saw it as this more kind of like,
mental illness.
Yeah, or like intentional horror show that he's trying to put out there. Just because I found that self, just complete, like ego destruction for the sake of truth and honesty. I found that really admirable, and so I appreciated that. And he was so kind of like openly, you know, a lot of the, you know, you know, talking about this, like driving to tears, and it seemed very, very genuine, and he was very, you know, very apologetic about the things that he put his wife through and all this stuff in his moments of detransition. But yeah, I think so much of it was just self-flagellation, and yeah, he had a lot of issues. Wait, how do we get here? But yeah, I do wonder, yeah, how much of that excessive dirty laundry showing was,
that's a really good point.
Technique.
A way, right. A way to like publicly hold yourself accountable. Like I've put out here and said how horrible and detrimental this was, and now I've put it into the public. Yeah, and so like it's this like communal keeping me accountable thing. Right.
Yeah. So if I it's like, yeah, just kind of like the binge and purge cycle on steroids, essentially. Doing it all in public.
Yeah. Shoop is a sad case. But yeah, I mean, I guess you know, thinking in terms of cinema, like I said, it's sort of interesting and noteworthy that a lot of researchers in the field were happy to see this.
Yeah.
And you know, so I guess like my only hope is like, let's have the next representation of autogynephilia on screen be of an autogynephilic transsexual. You know, someone who is, I mean, hopefully it's a more sympathetic story too, but yeah, someone who's living the life, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, but that is kind of a you know, a socio-political quagmire to wade into. And like you pointed out, I think they got away with this because it's like, oh, this is just he's just a dude who has this fantasy or this fetish, essentially.
You're right. Well, and frankly, you're gonna have to. This will be your homework, Aaron. You're gonna have to watch Envy Desire, because now that you say that, that's what they did there too. The only the accurate and exaggerated autogynephilic parts of the show are done on the boyfriend, the guy who starts off as the cis male, right?
Right.
They don't attribute it to any of the trans women in the show, even though I think most of the trans women in the show are autogynephilic. They are all presented as HSTS, as these, you know, intractably feminine males who are exclusively same-sex attracted, is how the trans women are presented in the show. And then they do kind of show the underbelly of autogynephilia through the chaser straight boyfriend.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's actually quite amazing that when I first encountered this scene, I said I've been watching this season of White Lotus, but usually I watch it the day after it airs because it's anyway. I watch, but my first encounter with this was actually the director of that film, the director of Envy to Desire, Amy something.
Mhm.
She posted that clip of the disclosure and just said, chasers 5 minutes out, or like chasers on a first date 5 minutes after saying they're straight or something. So yeah, that's just kind of perfect that yeah
Yeah.
she's the one who created that film and
Yeah.
yeah
Yeah.
knows full well, but yeah, but it is the same experience. Or like a returning pod guest who's quite wise in these ways has pointed out, it's like the actual two type dichotomy was that type, the that looks like the fetishistic cis man, the chaser. There's like that, and that's what's understood as autogynephilia. But then what's understood as HSTS is also autogynephilia. It's just
Right.
they're more they're more um, I don't know how to describe them, but like highly dysphoric, entirely in their metasexual attraction to men, but it is still the same underlying
Yeah.
sexuality.
Well, and it's a good reminder, this explanation of like something that we've spent a long time focusing on, not so much in this show, and maybe it's worth bringing up again, but is this like autoandrophobia, basically.
Right.
Which is
Those
which
with
is the
and
thing that
without.
is which
Yeah.
was totally lacking, right, in this representation. And I was thinking that just because of like what you're describing, sex dysphoria
Mhm.
can really change the trajectory, right? Can really impact the presentation of autogynephilia, right? And this guy obviously was not struggling with sex dysphoria, right? He was
No,
able to
certainly
have
not.
sex with men and women using his appendage and all of these things, right?
And even wanting to get a guy who looked like himself, like
Yeah.
like that's clearly not dysphoria. You're not trying to get away from your male self. You're just trying to be
Right.
the hot girl at the same time.
Right.
Very, very different. And going back and just been thinking about this when you're talking about like the sissy porn as that being an avenue into trans identity or realizing this autogynephilic propensity. But that too must be the kind of non-dysphoric presentation, because that's the thing with the sissy porn is it's all about being a male. It's like the sissy porn, hypno, whatever. It is an emasculation. That's what it's about. It's not about being a
Right.
woman,
The
being what you love.
feminization is emasculate. Right. Is
Right.
emasculinization.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What is being sexualized is
Emasculation.
emasculation.
Yeah.
So, and that obviously needs to take into, part of the fantasy, part of the reality of the fantasy is being male. And I think that is, yeah, I think again, it's all on the same spectrum, the same autogynephilic experience, but I do think that's probably distinct from those who are, yeah, have a serious case of autoandrophobia, because being a masculated male
Right.
is not going to do it for them, because that requires acknowledging being male.
So I completely agree, but I'll add in the nuance. This is something that I keep trying to drive home with. I think these are very fluid categories, and I can see a trajectory of a autogynephile who gets their start in the sissy porn, right? Still developing dysphoria. This seems like a very logical kind of track that I can follow, and coming to resent all of the sissy porn stuff because they
Right.
see it inherently as this male thing. It is
Yeah.
right. This shame is making me horny, and that actually disgusts me now that I am more feminized, right? In some
Yeah.
manifest way. But I think you're right. That is a different path than the sort of 13-year-old asexual, immediately sex dysphoric, right? The young man is very different from, I agree with you, like someone who's going to be able to kind of get into sissy hypno porn, right? Which, like you said, is sissy hypno porn is not a bunch of sexy trans women. It's men. It's
Being
masculine
emasculated.
men being emasculated and being feminized, right? And there's something that feminists will dislike about us using these two words, emasculating and feminizing, as like synonyms here, but that's okay. But yeah, but I do see how even that can still follow the trajectory of sort of autoandrophobia. I think autoandrophobia can still develop after, especially as a resentment of the male sex drive.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. Which I think is an interesting it's just a really interesting aspect of dysphoria or of autoandrophobia is fear of and resentment of male sexuality as a whole. And again, something that came out in this interview that Chloe Cole did with this young man detransitioner, and it was a throwaway line, like he didn't even repeat it more, but it stood out to me so much. Was he's just said at one point like that he didn't want to be a guy who was bad to women. And it's like, why does like being a guy include being bad to women? Because you see penis as rape stick, like Annie on steroids over here, right? Right, framing male sexuality as dangerous and harmful to women.
This is something that we only see, I think, in this younger cohort, and I think it has everything to do with being raised with online porn, which is very degrading and violent towards women. And I think you don't hear this in like the older transitioners who are like, oh, I hated my male sex drive because it implied, that I was, violent towards women or going to hurt women. And,
well, these men are also, these young guys are growing up in Me Too also.
True. Yeah. Yeah.
They're growing up in Me Too and toxic masculinity messaging and all of that stuff. So I think that contributes to it also, to why that is. And that's also why many optimistic GCs, especially maybe some like GC therapists and stuff, are able to frame this as these boys are overwhelmed by the expectations of masculinity. They don't have any affirming models of masculinity. They're being told that who they are naturally is toxic, and so that's why they're running away. And there's like elements of truth there, to the dysphoria experience or the autoandrophobia experience. But it's also rooted in the sexual. Like it's rooted in their own sexuality too. Like it's not just these societal expectations that they're afraid of and pushing back on. Their rejection of the societal expectations is part and parcel of those expectations being expectations of men. It's like these things are tied in together. It's sort of like when we were talking about the chicken and the egg of like the kind of really low level examples of cross-sex identity that people will give. I think it was when we were doing the Dr. Azakim video and saying how like people will say like, oh, she thought she was a boy because she always liked to wear, swim trunks and whatever. And it's like, well, no, she's just using the words and the constructs available. I think it's a similar thing going on with the young guys. Is like it can look from an untrained eye, it can look like the pressures of masculinity and young boys growing up in Me Too, but it's actually a step. It's way deeper than that, I guess.
So you think maybe that framing of being a man means hurting women is just like one of those kind of what we call maybe a cope, where it's like another explanation for why they have a female identity or want to transition. Is that what you mean? Or
no, not exactly, although possibly. Like I think that could be, but just more so that like you were sort of saying, like, why this is something that we really see with the younger ones and not the older ones. And I think that's because the younger ones have, people overuse socialization, but they have been socialized in an environment, in a culture that said that. I mean, if we take Me Too literally, that said that talking to a woman in a suggestive way could be harmful.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of the messaging from young women in the Me Too movement was basically they can't go outside their house without being, harassed by
Attacked. Yeah.
right,
Right.
right,
Right.
right. Yeah. And so it's not even just like I was thinking, Me Too is framed as like, oh, they're the predators and then everybody else,
Right.
but yeah, how a lot of it wasn't necessarily how it was framed even. Yeah.
Right. I think that can, on someone who's got this predisposition, let's say, right? That's like, especially especially when we consider the autogynephilic admiration of women, right?
Right.
It's like, especially they don't want to be that thing that is hurting women, hurting
Right.
girls.
They want to be one of the they want to blend in and just be one of the girls. Like
They
they want to
feel
be
like they are. They feel like, yeah,
right.
you should watch this Chloe Cole interview, and maybe we
Okay,
will
I will.
react to it here. And again, it's touchy because no one likes to be called an autogynephile if they don't see themselves that way. But I think this young kid has a sympathetic story, and again, I'm appreciative of the fact that he kind of really touches on the whole gamut of experiences. He's acknowledging this explicitly sexual motivation that really sent him down this rabbit hole, but also so many of these much more sympathetic experiences of like he had he had a lot of girl friends and he felt like he was like them, and he's able to say,
Mhm.
in hindsight, no, I'm not very feminine, right? I'm masculine in my own masculine way. But it was this very sincere and sympathetic of like, I relate more to the girl, in a way that I hear Annie describe it too,
Right, right,
and again, it's like,
right.
Annie, I don't think these things make you feminine. But I think Annie actually feels, and from a young age, like the people that she related to and was like were girls. Um, yeah, and so I think his story is helpful. It's a sympathetic story, basically. It's a pretty
Yeah, yeah,
sympathetic story that is also really explicitly autogyne. I feel like if you know what you're looking for.
yeah. And I think in a lot of these cases, Annie included, where they're thinking that they're relating with or identifying with the girls is really just a case of feeling alienated from the boys.
Yes,
And so
totally.
right. And so the girls are just, they don't actually know. They just know that they are boys, but the boys seem really alien and rough, and they like the girls better, and so they want to
Yes.
seem like and be one of the girls. When really, it's like we go back to it's more like just the autism gender. It's not that you're
Yeah, yeah,
feminine; it's just that you're not
totally.
masculine. And yeah,
Totally.
and
Yeah, and that is something, right, that is so critical, and once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? What so many trans women are referring to as a lifelong femininity was
mhm,
actually awkwardness and
mhm,
discomfort with explicit masculinity, right? It's
mhm,
like so many of these young guys, let's say, pre-transition or non-transitioners or whatever, they think of themselves as feminine because they don't love to play sports.
right. Right, and they don't feel comfortable with like kind of the objectification kind of sexuality that most heterosexual men express about women, because the autogynephiles, their sexuality is really tied up in the fact of like being feminine, of being a girl. And so
Right.
it's like having this really contrasted me versus my target attraction feels very foreign and uncomfortable to
And
an
uncomfortable.
autogynephile. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like I don't relate with them. I don't relate uh, with males and masculinity, just because I think that really the self versus other target attraction is not
Yeah.
relatable. But I think it's also the same thing with when people talk about like the butch lesbians or FTMs or whatever being masculine. In most cases, our personality isn't actually all that masculine. It's just we're uncomfortable with like what we see as the feminine performance, when it's really just like we're just the whole. And again, we get in trouble for overusing this word, but like the autism gender, or just not blending in with your own sex, or kind of understanding those kind of typical social norms. But yeah,
Yeah.
butch lesbians in general are often quite temperamentally quite feminine. But it's
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I couldn't
Yeah,
agree
going
more. And I think,
for tangent.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, what I was chomping at the bit to get out there is I think like And I guess for some obvious sexually dimorphic reasons, obviously, male cross-dressing or whatever is just like more obvious, you know, in a way. Like we can see, oh yeah, that's a very masculine looking person in these female clothes. Whereas when a woman cross-dresses, a lot of people will consider that to be masculine. Right. Like they will, it's like, oh, you see a woman with short hair and is wearing traditionally masculine clothing. Oh, that's a masculine woman. It's like, that's a really beautiful, soft, like, not that, you know, not to get into stepping people's toes here, but yeah, I guess it's something that I recognize because that's like kind of my type, is like how I used to describe it, as like soft butch, you know, is like someone with like an autoandrophile, right? Is someone with the swagger, who likes to have sort of a swagger and a almost a masculine confidence, but is like pretty and soft and yeah, and very very feminine in other ways, right? And so I think you're right. It's so funny because it just plays in with the, I'm gonna call it a delusion. I guess I'm feeling feisty. The delusion of like lesbianism being like this, just like equal, the equivalence of, you know, homosexuality in males, that we just have the same thing, and it's these like pervasively masculine women. And that's just often not what we're talking about. We're not talking about any type of pervasive masculinity. Um, and that would be offensive to a lot of to a lot of trans men and butch lesbians and all of that. I'm not trying to offend. But yeah, there is, I completely agree. I feel like people really misread the masculinity of butch women and trans men. It's like they're able to see that femininity almost only in the most obvious ways. Like every GC can point out the non-binary trans man who, after 2 years on T, finally now feels comfortable to wear nail polish and makeup, you know? Like, I didn't feel comfortable in my we talked about this, right? I didn't feel comfortable with my femininity before, but now I can. And so, yeah, the GCs can look at that and say, like, oh, okay, this is not even it's not a bloke. This is not a masculine person, you know? But when they see, like, a butch woman, even that term, it's like butch woman, it's like, what is that meant to describe? You have the Aaron Kimberleys out there who want butch woman to be its own distinct natural biological group. And to a certain extent, it is, insofar as there are more masculine women, like phenotypically masculine women. But actually, we're talking about women who put on a masculine role and style.
Right.
Regardless of their intention there. I'm not saying that all of them are doing it to put on a show. That could be total natural preferences. But yeah, it's like that's not necessarily masculinity.
Right. Yeah, a lot of what people see as masculinity in women is just having a short haircut, preferring male styles, but it's very superficial. It's just aesthetic, really. Sometimes it can get into the behavioral, but it seems barely below skin deep, you know. It's just like the swagger or whatever, having I wonder how much of it is part of the aesthetic of wanting to manifest masculinity, or natural, but
and even the wanting to manifest can be natural. It's something that we talked about a while ago on this show. But like, if you are naturally drawn, if you are inclined towards that, that's a natural preference, you know.
Right.
Even if you're drawn to it because you want to present in that way, it's like that is a natural preference. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
absolutely.
off there.
No, it's a good point. But I hadn't thought about that. It's like, people see a phenotypically normal male wearing feminine clothes and makeup, and they don't think, oh, that's a feminine man.
Right.
But you do see a phenotypically normal woman with short hair and male style, and go, oh, she's masculine. When
we'll have to touch on that again. Yeah, because I'm right. I'm having just like some thoughts about this that might be interesting to deep dive into, or just kind of think about. Because I'm remembering when you and I, however long ago, were watching kind of butch lesbian videos on YouTube and stuff, and I think it became really apparent at that point that so many of these butch appearing women are not necessarily very masculine
Yeah.
in disposition and demeanor. They just dress masculine, basically.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
that's the problem we get into in this conversation, and we should wrap it up because we're getting into other topics that it's worth exploring. But yeah, a lot of the people in this conversation really they balk at the idea that femininity or masculinity are dispositions, personality types, things like that. You know, a lot of the kind of gender critical standpoint is like, oh, it's just our bodies and everything else is just socially ingrained, you know, like socially taught or whatever. But it's just, sorry, it's not true. And, you know, there are, you know, psychologically males and females are very different. And usually most women who are trying to present masculinely are psychologically, you know, feminine, behaviorally, dispositionally. Yeah.
You're so right. You're so right. And it's a good reminder that a large part of the gender critical space
is rejecting those things.
Well, yes, but also is that just as unscientific, I guess, as the TRA space, right? It's like, right, they also believe in full socialization, like biology to the gender criticals is the neck down, which they'll kind of make fun of the TRAs for saying that, but no, that is also what the gender criticals think to a certain extent.
Right, because when you start talking about femininity and masculinity, they're like, get that sexism out of here. You know, it's like, they think anytime you're talking about, you know, real psychological differences between men and women, it's sexism. Because it's just, I think it's feminism kind of baked into it.
It is.
Not very helpful, but
no.
All right. Well,
cool.
That's our take on the AGP character as presented in White Lotus.
White Lotus Gate. Yeah.
White Lotus. Yeah. Lotus Gate. Was not nearly as much of a gate as I expected it to be, but listeners, if you think that we missed anything important or were unfair or whatever, please comment below. Let us know what you thought. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.